Welcome back to the Hubscale Podcast, where we interview the best and brightest from the cybersecurity industry. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Irene from Vintage Investment Partners. Irene, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited. Thank you.
So we'll get straight into it. Could you tell us a little bit more about yourself and also Vintage IP?
Yeah, sure. So I'm a partner at Vintage. I started my career at VC 11 years ago. Actually started in early stage investing in 2015, and cybersecurity was kind of the first industry I started to back. And I just happened to start focusing on this sector, which is amazing. And my first four deals were all in cybersecurity companies
Wow.
with an early stage fund based in Israel and in San Francisco. And yeah, these were kind of some great companies and great entrepreneurs that really define the way I think about early stage cybersecurity. Spent there 4 years, then moved to Cisco, Corp Dev and Venture, did a bunch of M&A deals, a bunch of venture investments as well. Pretty big transactions across the US and in Israel, again, in a focus on cybersecurity and enterprise infrastructure. It
Yeah.
was amazing couple of years, really helped me look at kind of strategic outcomes in a different way, to be on the acquirer side and kind of to see that journey of companies until they get to that finish line. And then I joined Sentinel One after the IPO to start the venture arm of Sentinel One, what we call S Ventures, really to build out the brand, the strategy, and start investing. And it was an amazing, amazing time. Was there for a couple of years, did a bunch of deals across cybersecurity and AI. And then I joined Vintage about a year ago, basically to lead our cybersecurity and enterprise infra strategy across our three investment strategies. And Vintage is a pretty unique creature, I would say, in
Yeah.
VC, and we talked about it a lot. And that's what kind of also drew me into the platform, because the way to look at us, we want to get exposure to the best companies from early stage to late stage. And the way we do that is through our three strategies. So our first strategy is our fund of fund platform, where we invest in the best funds globally that do early stage. And then we track these portfolios and double down on these companies through a direct investment via our direct venture strategy. And then we do secondaries once these companies mature and we see a window, a liquidation window, outcome window, call it 1 to 3 years from now. Nowadays, we manage a little over $4.6 billion with a B across these three strategies. Our HQ is in Israel, and we have offices in London and in the US, and we're a very kind of globally focused platform. 80-90% of what we do is in the US and in Europe. We have this special access in Israel as well, which also kind of helps us when we partner with funds outside of Israel that want to get that look inside the country as well. So yeah, if I'm summing it up, I spent the last 11 years in a lot of kind of direct investing and in acquiring companies and across corporates and early stage. Venture and Vintage for me is kind of the accumulation of all of that, and seeing things from a completely different perspective. And yeah, it's a very, very special venture strategy platform.
For sure, it's certainly unique, and it's been interesting getting to know you over the past few months and hearing about all the different ways in which you can support the industry. Obviously, investing in cybersecurity at the moment, so much of the
Yeah.
talk is about AI, and
Yes.
I think it's really interesting that how do investors distinguish signal from noise in the AI era?
Yeah, I think it's a huge challenge. I mean, and I see that across our portfolio funds as well. And and we have some incredible managers within our fund of fund. And so it's always kind of a privilege to hear their perspective as well and how do they approach it, and especially because they're doing so early, like in the life cycle, they're doing seed investments. So it's really, really hard to kind of differentiate what you say, kind of the signal from the noise, because it's all about the team and the initial idea and the technology. And I do think that as you go out, at the life cycle of the company, you have more signal, right? So it's easier kind of to understand that. I think for me, like especially in the era of I think the number one thing is how teams are thinking about this next gen moat in this era, because it's not only about technology anymore. It's not only about the best teams out there, the brilliant technologies that can build a great product. It's more about distribution and go to market, and how do you build a moat that will be sustainable as you grow out the company. And I think, it's kind of looking at the problem differently than what we did in the past, or the opportunity differently. We, especially in cybersecurity and enterprise infra, you always want to back the best teams that are building, like with the best building capabilities, and that still holds true. I just think that nowadays the go-to-market risk is becoming way, way larger than the
Right.
product and kind of technology risk, right? So you do want to make sure that you're backing a company or a team, rather, if it's super early, that has that plan in mind and can leverage something within their initial offering that can help them with distribution, that can help them with go-to-market, that they have a plan on how to be inserted within enterprise workflows in a way that will be very, very different to replace them. So just putting that, lens on, let's look at the go-to-market risk and the distribution risk. I think that's what helps me, at least, try to differentiate between the signal and the noise.
That's so interesting. So hypothetically, so many of the founders, amazing founders in the cybersecurity industry are really heavily weighted towards technical backgrounds. Has it changed the way that you interview these people and the way that you approach getting to know them?
I think it's still, in terms of the team capabilities, and especially it really depends on the stage. So I in the direct strategy, I invest like mid stage, right? It's
Yeah.
not super, super early, not like our managers that do seed investing. And I used to do that like for over a decade. I invested in such early stages. Like, so for me, it really depends. When I look for direct investments now for vintage. It's still all about the team, of course, and we can get into that more kind of deeper. But I also try to look at what kind of signals, are they generating? How
Sure.
does the growth look like? What our customers are saying? How expansions look like? Is the product, what I said before about, if it's kind of intertwined into the enterprise workflow, are they thinking about it? If it's still early, are they thinking about it? If it's at the stage where you want to see that, like how does it look like, and how do customers talk about that? Like, did they replace something? Are they sitting on proprietary data? How difficult it will be to kind of replace them. And obviously in the era of, the Anthropics of the world, and these like very scaled large players they do want to get into the enterprise. That's of course something that you think about. But I think within cybersecurity in particular, but also like more broadly on like on enterprise AI, I do think there's so much opportunity to build businesses that are separate from that, and they kind of leverage some unique proprietary data and leverage focus on a specific workflow within the enterprise. So I do think that these are kind of the things that I'm looking separately from the general question of like, will Anthropic do it eventually? That everyone is kind of, trying to figure out their plans, right? But yeah, I think that these are kind of some of the things that I'm looking at. I do think that getting customers' feedback is becoming even more important than ever. And on the team side, which is again, like it's all about the team, right? The market is changing, the technology stack is changing. You really want to back like a team that knows how to navigate that. And I don't think that is gonna ever change. What can change is, the type of founders and their experience that you want to back. Obviously people that have more experience, and it's interesting in Israel because we do have kind of newer set of companies that are scaled, and we didn't have that before. So it's like, in particular in this industry here, it's interesting to see. You see people that actually experience with like large distribution and large scale go-to-market machines. And that is becoming even more important in the era of AI. And so looking to back teams that have that experience, like obviously everyone wants to back a second timer. It's always something that they're always getting a premium, right, on the rounds that they're raising. But looking at it kind of less cynically and more deeply, I think it's about if they can actually learn, if they actually learned how to scale, and that is becoming even more important because
Sure.
you're not looking for the 2x growth anymore. You're looking for, as an early stage investor, right? I'm not an early stage investor right now. I just see our GPs doing that, and you're really looking to these crazy growth like this, and you want to back the teams that can actually do that. And so you are looking for someone that already proved that they can do that. So that is becoming even more important.
So you think the best top tier GPs now are looking, if they can't find a second time founder, they're looking for somebody who's experienced that rapid scaling of the go-to-market engine.
It's interesting. I do think that that's a category that is obviously very appealing, for experienced top tier GPs. Of course, they want to have to back these teams that they can see how they can build large businesses. On the other side of it, you see tons of super young entrepreneurs that are
Yeah.
building incredible businesses in the era of AI, and they're super flexible and they're agile and their grit is incredible. And I see this category going, like, it's getting bigger and bigger, and these are entrepreneurs
Definitely.
that kind of, they're almost born in this era. They were born with an iPhone in their hand, and they were born in this digital era. And I do think that, you know on one side you see these second timers and third timers coming back, to build their like largest outcome ever in their mind, like go big or go home. And then on the other side of it, you're seeing these very, very young entrepreneurs. And it's not only about age, it's the way that they approach problems, and they are
Mm.
approaching problems in a different way. And I do think that you see these two clusters of talent, and it's incredible to watch. And I think that in AI you see it a lot, right? In AI, like in pure AI and AI infra and AI applications, you see that a lot. You see a lot of young talent. I think in cyber, it really depends on the geography. In Israel, it's very clear. Like you have these teams that are just straight out of 8200, super young, zero business experience, super strong technologically, and they're as much as like being approached as the experienced second and third timers. So you see these two clusters, and I think in AI generally in the US, you see these two clusters even more in a more kind of broader way.
Mm. How do you see that playing out, you know, in the next few years, the two clusters of founders, where do you see that going? Do you think it's going to stay like that forever? How's it going to evolve?
I think in general, the way that we build companies is changing, right? Everything is changing. The way that
Yeah.
we build our companies, the way that we define what is enterprise software, the
Mm.
way that buyers are like their expectations of how enterprise software looks like. I think the whole cycle is changing. So I think the bigger question in my mind is how will the future company look like? Will the future vendor look like in terms of everything, in terms of roles? To what does a CEO does and what does a VP engineering does? If we'll even have the same kind of roles within the founding team, how will the founding team look like? how will, the first generation of team look like? What will be the first talent that you're kind of fighting on? Like everything is changing. The
Yeah,
marketing engine is changing. The
definitely.
internal tech stack is changing. Your budget lines are changing. And so obviously, I think it also affects the people that are, at the helm, navigating these ships. So I think that is kind of the more interesting and so like for now it's a huge question mark on how will the future vendor will look like. And I do think that what's interesting is that I always talk about in cyber the triangle of like the attacker, the defender, and the buyer, right? And
Mm.
for years we were talking about the defender, and we're talking about the attacker. The attacker does something, the defender defends, and that in that triangle, the buyer was always kind of a reactive point in that triangle, a passive, shall I say, player. And I think that's changing as enterprise software is changing and your expectations as a buyer are changing. And, I was thinking about it a couple of years ago when we just started using ChatGPT, and I looked at the data and I saw that actually cybersecurity teams are pretty, the first ones that are adopting these technologies, and they're kind of used to AI as well, like the AI jargon, because cybersecurity, we had AI in our infrastructure and underlying technologies for years, right? It's
Yeah,
not
yeah,
it's not new it's not new for us. It's what's new is the interaction with the customer. What's new is a different kind of stack and the agentic capabilities and a lot of other things. But it kind of got me to think that eventually you sell to a person, right? And it's always kind of like, yes, it's a B2B sale, but it's actually a B2C sale because you're selling to someone at the end of the line. And at the era of ChatGPT and at the era of agents, it's really difficult to see cybersecurity companies not being not providing almost a consumer-like experience to their buyers. And so I think that the buyer their expectations are changing of how do they interact with the software that they're buying. And that trickles down into what capabilities are you developing in your product to make that experience adhere with the customer expectations. And so that also trickles down into how do you build your product, right? And what are their underlying technologies and experiences, and who is navigating that. And I do think, one anecdote, I see a lot of teams that are kind of rethinking about the role of customer success and how
mm.
customer success looks like. And I'm sure you're seeing this as well, right? They're tied to the product more than ever.
Yeah,
That
we're
is so
seeing
interesting.
forward deployed engineer is becoming like there's a wave of recruitment and super technical customer success.
Yeah, yeah, and you want that because the feedback loop is changing. The customers are sitting like super close to the product. So you have to
Yeah,
have your customer success teams or whatever you want to call it, these people within your company that are actually interacting with the customer and helping them leverage the product, right? You want them
definitely.
to be super technical. So that's such an interesting development within the organization of the vendor, and like who in the org chart, and who do you need to these roles, to fill these roles, and who, like, what's the bright background for these roles. So I do think that we're gonna see that change across your entire org chart within a vendor that is selling cyber or an AI infra, platform for a customer.
Definitely. That's been a huge, there's been a huge surge in that requirement in the last 12 months. It's crazy.
Yeah.
All this change, Iren, how is it going to impact cybersecurity as an investment sector? Is it still a resilient investment category?
It's funny because I always say that why cyber is kind of my favorite sector to back is because it is super resilient, because at times of recession, cyber is kind of the last one to go because you don't want to hurt your compliance and the risk that is associated with like dropping down cybersecurity investment. And then
Yeah,
on the other side, in an innovation cycle, if it's a booming economy, it's like one of the first things that you're investing in, and the data kind of shows that, like, around COVID and around the financial crisis, like IT budgets shrinked and cybersecurity budget didn't, and even
Really?
went up. So it's really interesting to see, and it's a very good question of like how it will look like, going forward. Obviously, everything that is happening with Mythos and AI models that are showing capabilities that we've never seen before. My kind of thought around that is that it's gonna evolve, like every sector is gonna evolve, and like there will be table stake capabilities of AI providers that will kill entire categories, right? And we already see that erosion in value across several sectors within cybersecurity. But it's kind of you're opening up other avenues of value for customers. So I can give you an example. Obviously Mythos is kind of looking at finding vulnerabilities super fast, etc. That on the other side of it, and then obviously that kind of creates a threat on a lot of players around application security, around vulnerability management, etc. I think that in general, if you talk to customers, you will hear that it's actually getting demand for platforms that are doing the full cycle of of prioritization of discovery for the prioritization and then remediation, right? A platform that does everything, because they know that they're getting this influx of vulnerabilities and they don't know what to do with it. Yeah, and that's not something new. We're talking about it for months in the industry. So actually these exposure management full cycle companies are getting a really interesting pipeline right now because of that. Like
Definitely.
they're becoming top of mind, right? So that's one example. But even think about in general, AI security is becoming a category, right? It's new. It wasn't like that. It was kind of from the innovation budget, and people were experimenting with that, and they were thinking about it from a DLP perspective and buying these kind of against prompt injection companies that were like very, very focused on their value position. And today we're seeing a new generation of AI security companies being born that are actually more broad and are looking at the discovery piece and the governance piece and then runtime piece, and you are seeing RFPs going out of AI security, right? And you're seeing it yourself. It's something that you in Hubscale, I'm sure, are experiencing with more and more, and the kind of the demand for AI security solutions that can help you deal with all of that, end to end problem is surging. And so there's a new category in town, and it's becoming a real category. I think that a couple of years ago we didn't say that. We were kind of debating, and obviously there are like hundreds of vendors in this, in this sector, but in general, I think it's becoming a category. So just to sum it up, I think that obviously there are threats, and we will see areas that are becoming commoditized, and obviously there are huge opportunities, because as always, and I don't think it's going to change, like with every technological wave, there is cybersecurity risk involved. That's kind of the fundamental aspect of bad people want to leverage holes in your cybersecurity perimeter. Like that's not going to change. Unfortunately, it's just going to get worse, and it's going to hurt consumers as well, and it's going to hurt all of us. So it's just exasperating the problem. So the problem of cybersecurity is not going to go anywhere. The question is, how will the future solutions are going to look like?
For sure. Really well summed up there. And like, obviously you get a bit of a bird's eye view of the market, Iren. Where are
Yep.
the
Yeah.
emerging opportunities and what are the categories to watch, do you think?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's interesting because cybersecurity, and I was talking to several customers about that not so long ago. It's kind of looked at as a capped market. If you're looking at cybersecurity, you're like, yeah, it's $100 billion market, which is a big one, but it's not huge. It's not looked at as AI, and AI is actually getting the cybersecurity market larger, I think, and that's a thesis, but I do think that's the case, because as enterprise adopt these new technologies and are basically changing their entire enterprise software stack, little by little, piece by piece, department by department, but it is happening, right? And so the entire enterprise software stack is changing. Cybersecurity has to adapt. The new generation of cybersecurity products and the incumbents in the market have to adapt to that reality, right?
Yeah.
And to secure that stack in this new era. And so I do think that if you're looking at opportunities, there are opportunities in markets that are today well defined and are not adaptable to everything that is happening in AI, but they're still well defined and the budget is there. I can give you an example, for instance, network security. Network security is not really going anywhere, and there's so much investment that companies did in actual hardware and actual appliances and actually like manage their network footprint with security, but it's changing because of AI traffic, and because of how organizations work today. So there is a really big opportunity for new players around, and we see that, and we talked about it before. I mean, there are new players around, super interesting, that have a new idea on how network security should look like. And so I think that's one area that we would see a lot of innovation going forward in the next couple of years. I think another area, and it's going to be interesting to see how it evolves, but as kind of the future of work is changing, email security has to change with it. And I mean, for me, it's a sore point because I mean, the amount of emails that are going to spam on a daily basis for me is huge. And I look at this and I'm like, how is this possible in 2026? That my email provider doesn't know how to handle email. But I really do think that it's an area that is going to change because the future of work is going to change. And we see that, talking about network security before, we see that with browser security, it's becoming kind of the next gen SASE-ish, category, or it's playing there, right? So, I do think that, and it's because people consume applications through the browser, right? And so I do think that for email security, also things are changing. You even think about, you're interacting with Microsoft Copilot and you're resurfacing email through Microsoft Copilot. Like, a lot of the organizational kind of knowledge bases are changing. And so, and the way that you interact with email, suggestions over email, like a lot of things are changing. So I think that, it's time for new vendors in this category, or innovation in this category. So I think that's the second one that I think is really interesting. And by the way, we do see some kind of players that are emerging there, and it's
Sure.
really interesting. And yeah, and I would say the third one, it's not new, but I think it's like very early in that, is everything that concerns the SIEM and the SOC, and how are they merging together. And
Yeah.
you know obviously there's a lot of like activity going on there. There are a lot of vendors that are looking at it from different kind of aspects, right? SOC vendors that are expanding to SIEM, and SIEM vendors, or like next gen SIEM vendors that want to own the SOC, and companies are coming from below on the data ingestion pipeline,
Yeah.
and companies that are
Okay.
sitting above. Like, it's so many different angles, right? But the main idea there is that it doesn't make sense that you're collecting, data across the organization, and you don't have a full picture of what is happening.
Mm.
You're not getting like real time, not false positive, like with zero false positive alerts, and you don't have an automatic way to handle these alerts and close the loop, and not talk about like investigation. That's even worse, right? After an attack happened. And so I do think that we don't see the future of the SOC yet fully realized. And I think there's a lot of things to do there. And I think that seeing that SOC and SIEM merge into kind of one platform category and one platform in general,
Mm.
we're going into that direction. Like, the future SOC will look completely different than what it looks like today. A summary of many technologies and many integrations and some automation and some manual. Like, it's going to look completely different. And I do think there's a lot of things that we can do there as an industry.
The enterprise stack just in general is being reshuffled, isn't it? Who do
Yes,
you think are going to
yes.
be the winners and losers?
That's a very good question, and I wish I had a crystal ball. But I think in general, companies that are thinking as platforms and are very, very good at product velocity and are very good at thinking about what is the adjacent market that I can enter that makes a lot of sense within my sales motion will win.
Yeah.
And that is very hard to do. And I
Sure.
also think that's one number one. I also think that cracking down large enterprises early can be a differentiator, and it's hard to do for young companies, right? It's really, really hard to do. But I think like having a very good footprint in these highly, highly regulated industries or large enterprises, and I do think that today in the AI world, like things are changing and it can become like more easier to do earlier in the life cycle of a company. And I do think that that is a very good sign of companies that can win if they have these very large customers pretty early on in their journey. I think the third one, and it's that's a general comment on companies in the era of AI, like the defensibility is becoming different and being very, very integrated within enterprise workflow. And kind of once you're there, start expanding into adjacent markets or adjacent categories will probably be the key. And I think four, and this is gonna be maybe kind of contrarian, but I do think that companies that offer services very early on will win. I think that as our expectations from software change, we also there are a lot of like outsourcing going on right now, and a lot of companies that are looking to consume their security services in a different way. And I think there's a lot of things to do there in the security services industry. And I actually want to add that to the list of big areas to watch for. But I think that companies that offer that, vendors of the future that will offer security services as well, makes a lot of sense to me. You want that premium offering, you want the outsource capability, even if you're a big organization and you're a large enterprise. And so I do think that that's big. And by the way, the services can be agentic, right? It doesn't have
Yeah,
to
for
be
sure.
manual. It doesn't have to be actual analysts. I think we will see like just like supercharged analysts that are like leveraging an army of agents on top of that and in the security services industry. But in general, I think that that can also be a very large differentiator for companies that want to become kind of the next generation of security platforms.
For sure. Well, founders, you heard it here first. That's what you should be building next. We've spoken a couple of times about the convergence of like the CIO and the CISO roles. Why do you think technology and security leadership is becoming intertwined?
I think it's really interesting. I think that these teams are beginning to talk to each other more. And if they're not, leaders understand that they need to talk to each other more. And
Hmm.
we've seen the outages that happened in the last couple of years, and we see what happens when we don't have a really good view on the resilience of our infrastructure and how
Yeah,
security affects that, right? And so I do think that is a huge contributor to that trend. And it makes a lot of sense in my mind because eventually, like it has like these departments have to talk to each other to create like a cohesive strategy around security and around infrastructure within your organization. And that also kind of it's interesting. There's a new category in town, like the cyber resilience category, and it kind of affects each other, right? Like you see CISOs that care more or own resilience, and then you see infrastructure leaders that care more about security gaps and resilience. So that kind of contributes to the fact that there's that need that is is taking shape, and then there are companies that are starting to address that. And you saw the kind of the first generation of companies that do that and operate in this market, like the rubrics of the world, cohesities of the world. But then you see a new generation of companies that are operating there, and I think that that's kind of answers the part of the reason of why both of these organizations should talk to each other. And a lot of times it really depends on the structure of organization. The CISO reports to the CIO, or these are kind of separate roles. And I think that there is kind of a conversation of it doesn't make sense to have these roles separated. The security budget has to be part of the conversation of like the broader IT budget. It has to be, like run by one person. And this decision, it needs to be like more kind of in a holistic way, look at it together. And also, I think you see a new generation of products that are like semi-IT, semi-security products, and they're doing the value that they're giving is like, is both ways. And so if a couple of years ago, I've been looking at the kind of asset management space, and I did Exonius. It's one of my earlier deals, that they were born in a world where these two departments are not talking to each other. And that is extremely hard, right? And I do think that, and the benefit was kind of both ways. And so I do think that, nowadays it's a bit different, and it's starting to be different. And you actually see more like roles being registered, people that are organizations that are looking for a CISO CIO role that is combined. And it's not only because there is kind of like a general like shrinking ecosystem of like leadership roles within enterprises, but also it's because it makes sense for these two roles to talk to each other.
For sure. How do you think cybersecurity vendors should react to this phenomenon?
I think in general, and that's not only around like IT and cyber. I think in general, like thinking through like how do you fit in within the general like tech stack of an organization, and how do you interact with different parts of the organization is becoming like more important. And I do think that if like a couple of years ago, I would talk to companies that have this kind of IT security kind of a lens, and it was a super hard sell because you need to convince like two leaders or two different teams, and that was very hard to do because you need to have two champions, and it's not clear from where the budget is coming. Like this is like slowly is starting to change. It's not there yet, but we see the trend. And so if you are operating in this kind of space when you have these two champions, it's becoming easier for you to build products that can like the language that you're describing your product, and the value that you're signing to the product, and like the different views that the product has, like this is all kind of converging. That's a really good thing. And I do think like the other vendors that are not there yet, but are operating in realms that are like touching different departments that are also going to converge within like security and IT, start thinking about how do you address needs of the other departments, because it makes sense and it actually can be an expansion opportunity for you. And so, yeah, I would definitely, in general, not only or on this point of like convergence of CIOs and CISOs, in general, I think because the enterprise is changing, like roles are changing, and the hierarchy is changing slowly, but it's happening. The departments are changing, like the org chart is changing. So vendors should kind of react to that, right? Like you need to know who you're serving, maybe your champion will change. Like this will happen, like this will take a long time. It's not like it's happening today across every organization, but it's happening, like it's everywhere. So I would like always keep my eye out, on these changes, and try to understand like, is my product still serving the right audience, and how my audience is reacting, and if there's new audience involved, and like how does it look like. That's not something new that I'm saying. I'm just saying like, it's not only within cyber, right? It's not only like AI attacks are on the rise and I need to address that. It's also how does your buyer, like what are the expectations from your software in today's world? How does your buyer like change in this world, and who is your buyer today, and what are their like your expectations, and like from their role, and like who is the right champion for you, and like all of these questions are kind of, it's always very, very important to like keep resurfacing them again and again.
For sure. Again, really well summarized. Just finally, sort of closing question. What advice would you give founders in the AI era when they're trying to catch the eye of an investor like you? Like, what is the most important thing that they need to demonstrate?
I think, the fundamentals still haven't changed in the fact that you have to have a very good team, founder, like founder role fit, which is not something that people think about a lot, but it's very, very important, the founder role fit and
For sure.
the team dynamics. That's like for early stage, right? The team dynamics. And if the problem is large enough, and if this team has kind of the right experience to solve this specific this specific problem is like super, super important. And if the product itself, like, and the business itself has any kind of moat, and in today's world where it's very hard to answer that question, and if they're thinking about go to market and distribution channels, and like all of these questions haven't changed from an investor perspective, they just became sharper, and there are new questions around like what I mentioned before, like the go-to-market
Yeah.
distribution importance, like very, very early on. I think that's kind of like the list of things that you would search for as an investor, and that hasn't changed.
So much has changed, but that has stayed the same, really, which
The
is interesting.
fundamentals of like the fundamentals of like who do you back as a team at early stage, I think hasn't changed. What you
Right.
want to see is like, obviously, if we're talking about solving something within like network security, you want to see people that have that experience, and you want to see people that are thinking about it in the era of AI, and you want to understand
Sure.
if they have the right background. So like the background can change, right? And the found and how how are they thinking about building the infrastructure of their own company, and are they building it in an AI build way, and there's like so many different things that are folded within the fundamentals, that the fundamentals are always you want to back the right team at the right time in the right market, right? So that's not going to change anytime soon.
I think that's a perfect way to finish, Iren. You just summarized what you do in a sentence.
Yes,
Thank you so much for your time. That was
thank
awesome.
you.